Andrew Donaldson joins us on the program. And I guess by way of introduction, Andrew and I it's one of these Twitter connections. And I
Yep.
think I first found you after reading an article that was, I guess, an ode to Waffle House.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I write food stuff just because we do culture and politics is kind of the day job. So the food stuff kind of keeps you sane. And yet I have a side website where I do a lot of long form writing, and one of them was on Waffle House. Did the full history, which I don't think a lot of people maybe knew. I know I didn't know it. Going back to basically two World War II vets who incidentally, he wasn't even in the restaurant business. He was in real estate. Went to sell the other guy a house, and they both ended up in restaurant business together. So just a great all-American story, all the way up through the fact that FEMA actually uses Waffle House as a gauge of how bad a disaster is, because Waffle House has multiple plans to stay open, even if they don't have water, even if they don't have electric, things like that. So it's quite the journey from two World War II vets selling one the house. He ended up selling him the house next door to his, and they became friends, and then that turned into Waffle House, which is everywhere now. And then now they're more efficient than FEMA. So it's quite the American story. I love that stuff. Plus, I like Waffle House. I like my scattered coverage. So
the That's an interesting segue into one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. So you do a lot of writing, a few different places, and one of the pieces actually was picked up recently about Joe Manchin.
yeah.
So here it is, October the 4th,
Mm-hmm.
2021. Joe Manchin went from, I guess, maybe not necessarily a household name unless you're knee deep in following politics, to he and Senator Sinema are the two holders of all of the power, if you listen to
Yep.
one side of the argument. But your article on Joe Manchin and his history is pretty illuminating.
Yeah.
And what, as you were researching the piece, and you're a West Virginia native, you split
Mm-hmm.
time between there and your home in North Carolina. Um, what jumped out at you that maybe as a native you weren't expecting to find out during that research for the piece?
It's not that I didn't expect to find out. I knew it, but it put it in perspective of how fast the state of West Virginia changed. And I should know better because I lived through the real big political change, and I'm talking politically and demographically here. And I wrote in the piece, when Joe Manchin was a kid, when he was 10, 12 years old, West Virginia had 6 congressional districts. By the time his 2024 term comes up, we're going to be down to 2. They're doing redistricting now. We're going to be losing the 3rd congressional district. That's a massive change for 55, 60 years. And so when you start thinking about the terms of what that means for a state, demographically, politically, power-wise, funding-wise, that's a massive amount of change in a very short period of time in a state that, like a lot of the rest of the Appalachian region, and they've kind of synonymized a lot of it. Um, does it change is always usually not in the good way. So when you start looking at somebody like Joe Manchin, he seems like this oddity now, but not that long ago, he was pretty normal. He was a pretty normal mainline Democrat most of his life. For example, the first time I went to vote, 1998, that's when I registered to vote. I turned 18. Everybody was a blue dog Democrat in West Virginia. West Virginia was Democratic for 100 years. Cobalt blue. It was one of the most Democratic states in the country. And Joe Manchin was he's right in that vein of what, when I was growing up, that's what everybody was. They were a little more socially conservative, but they were still, union social programs, what we call blue dog Democrats. But that was a normal thing. And now here we are, 20, 25 years later, and he's one of the last ones. And on a national level, at least, it's a very rare thing. So using Joe, even though he's in the process of the news right now, the real amazing thing is that, hey, not too long ago, he was the norm. Now he's the oddity. He's considered the oddball outlier. And then when we start looking at politics as a whole, what does that tell us when something like that has changed that much? I think it's just an interesting way to get into it and start looking at, well, this is how a lot of the country's changed. And this is how you look at the last 5 years of Trump and these sorts of things. It's a good way to get into some of those deeper issues.
So the matter that West Virginia has changed, or is it more of a matter that the Democrats have moved so far left that Joe Manchin, who has been stalwart, might be a good word to use. I mean, he
it's
said
a Democratic dynasty.
Yeah. And he said to people, if you want to elect a progressive, elect a progressive. And that hasn't really worked out for the progressives that ran against him. So is it a matter that the party has gone so far left that he's just there in the middle where a lot more sensible Democrats want to find themselves?
It's both. What it is with the Democratic, I always say West Virginia is demographically bleeding to death, which is not too much of an exaggeration. The state trends very, very old. We're one of the oldest states. We're one of the highest states, what our UK friends would call pensioners, people on disability, people on retirement, people on Social Security. We always have one of the highest per capita of that. So the electorate trends older. Older electorate's going to be a little bit more conservative, even though they just now, even with West Virginia going red, it was just this past year that they finally evened up the Republican and Democratic voting. It was still a heavily Democratic registered state. It just finally caught up this year, even with the massive wins that Trump and others have had. So that trends, older state is going to be a little more conservative anyway. Then the other thing what happened is, you're right, the Democratic Party got way more progressive, especially socially, a lot faster than those people who are, more traditional type of people, 90 some odd percent Protestant, 95, 96% white. They didn't want to go socially left as fast as the Democratic Party went. For example, Bill Clinton won that state very, very easily. When Al Gore lost it to W, it was considered a shock to a lot of people. And then Bush I think he beat Kerry by like 11 or 12 points, and then it's not even been competitive since. So that's a big swing in a hurry, and you can kind of track that with when the Democratic Party got more to the left, especially on social issues. It's going to catch up, especially with that older generation dying off. I think it'll come back, because now you got the three biggest voting groups in West Virginia now are healthcare workers, people on government assistance, either Social Security, and government employees. Those are the three largest voting groups, and those are traditionally pretty favorable to Democrats. So at some point it'll start flipping back, but for right now it's a deep red state. And the old Hemingway quote, it happened gradually, then suddenly.
And as an outsider, one of the things I always think about with West Virginia is Senator Byrd.
Yeah.
And specifically all of do you call them pork? All of the projects that ended up, because of a combination of Byrd's power and the proximity to the Beltway, a lot of things ended up being located in West Virginia. And I wonder if that can possibly continue, both in a West Virginia in this current climate with Joe Manchin as senator, and also just given the profligate spending from everybody on Capitol Hill.
Well, it's a different Senate than what Robert Byrd was in for, 60 some years he was in the U.S. Senate. So it's a little different, but yeah, you're right. I forget what the list tallies up to, but it's like 30 or 40 things in the state named for him, everything from high schools to garages. The observatory in Greenbank's named after him. We used to joke, if you go from one end of the state to the other, you got to take the Robert C. Byrd Highway across Robert C. Byrd Bridge and turn left to Robert C. Byrd High School. And that's not too much of an exaggeration. His name is on everything. Joe Manchin's obviously a little different. He doesn't hold that type of power, even though people think he's powerful now for other reasons. But it's the mentality, I think, is the same. Every time you hear Joe Manchin talk, and I touched on it in the piece in the Washington Examiner magazine, every time you talk, he's always like, well, what is this going to do for West Virginia? He has that mindset because he does, he did feel that, like, I'm taking Robert Byrd's seat. He was governor at the time. Remember, he had to step down and then take the Senate seat. So he feels that mantle in a way. He can never get anywhere close to what Robert Byrd did money-wise. But the mentality is always there of, I'm a senator. That means I've got to bring things home, both politically and I think he really does care. I don't think it's all, just politics. But that's a legacy that lingers. And when you're the Manchin family is a dynasty, a political dynasty. It's a Democratic dynasty. That's something that he carries, and it's not a shadow, probably too much, but it's something he's probably mindful of, and you can hear it in his sound bites because he's always, well, what's this going to do for the people of West Virginia? That's kind of the Robert C. Byrd bring home the pork legacy that you'll hear out of Joe Manchin.
So you raise an interesting point, because I would imagine that the odds of Joe Manchin switching parties
Zero.
Close to zero. Okay.
If it happens, look eastward. Christ is returning.
Okay.
It's never going to happen. You got to understand, Joe Manchin's family, his uncle was legendary in West Virginia. This would be like a Kennedy in Massachusetts going red. It's not going to happen. He's never going to do it. And now he really would never do it, because everybody, if you've noticed anything about Joe Manchin, is if you start pressuring him to do something, he bows up.
Yeah.
So he definitely is never going to do it. Part of this is the media environment we are in. Part of this is he has a personal beef with the progressive left going back to his last re-election campaign, where he, as you basically quoted earlier, he said, vote me out. That was on a conference call with Bernie Sanders supporters, the progressive left. And he, not to be too blunt, he basically cussed them out to their face and said, if you can beat me, beat me. And they put a candidate up against him, and he hung a 40-point win on him. So he's not overly impressed with them. They don't like him. He don't like them, and they're not hiding it. And that's a big dynamic when you think about it. So he really sees it as, he's like, no, dang it, this is my party. And even if you're only going to leave me this one little corner of it, it's my corner. I'm not going anywhere. There's zero chance. People talking about him switching parties. There's no way. It's never going to happen. And especially at 74 years of age, where he's at the end of it. He's in legacy building mode, which is what it's kind of the big piece you need to keep in mind with a lot of this with him. This is his legacy capstone, what he's doing right now. Yeah, that's not going to happen ever.
What advice, I guess, would you have as a West Virginia native, perhaps to people in Arizona who are dealing with another similarly maverick appearing senator who happens to be a member of the Democratic Party, but is being, depending on the day and depending on the Twitter user, pilloried for her staunch beliefs? What advice would you give to somebody sitting out in Arizona, probably politically homeless, and wondering, what the heck does all this mean?
Yeah, and Arizona's almost like the opposite of West Virginia. It's a rapidly growing state. They're very prosperous right now. It's one, Phoenix has long been one of the fastest growing areas in the country. It's a diverse state. You have the Flagstaff area is very different than the Phoenix area. The thing I would tell them is they should look at the back history of how West Virginia politics has changed in the last 20 years, especially our Republican friends out there. Like, you don't realize how fast these things switch. If you start taking out moderates and you start not working with some moderates, your state will go from red to purple to blue in a hurry. West Virginia never went purple, for example. It just went blue straight to red in about really an 8-year period. If you follow the career of Shelley Moore Capito, who's now the senator, when she went into the House, she was the first Republican in the House in like 17 or 18 years, and now she's in the Senate. And now Joe's the only one in the entire thing. So the Arizona folks, I would tell them to look at the history. Like, if you think the Republican Party is just going to hold what they have and attack that. Now, for the progressive side of it, it's the same things. Like, if you want to win in a state that's changing like that, you're going to take out a moderate. You're going to give your opponents a big opening. You need probably that moderate. She's going to get compared to McCain unfairly because that's his seat and he was there for forever. But there's a reason McCain was the way he was out there, because it played with his constituency. We've kind of lost this idea. Everything's national politics. We've lost this thing that, you have a constituency to answer to. Joe Manchin has to answer to West Virginia. Kristen Sinema has to answer to Arizona, and Arizona is a changing electorate rapidly. We know what's going on with the hard right out there with the election and all that stuff. And if progressives go to headhunter, I'm not sure that they don't do themselves a lot of damage, especially this chasing her in the bathroom stuff we saw this weekend. That's just a horrible look. They could be the opposite of a West Virginia, and that thing could swing either which way based on people's behavior, believe it or not just the politics.
You said something interesting on Twitter a few weeks ago, and it stuck with me because it's true. This debt ceiling stuff is bonkers, and it happens all the time, and it doesn't matter which party's in power, and it's a bunch of theater.
It is.
So why do we do this all the time? We being the American electorate / the folks in Washington. Why do we do this all the time? Why do the electorate keep sitting there going, debt ceiling?
Yeah.
Why does it matter?
Well, it doesn't matter, and that's the problem. They have no electoral fear. I'm talking about Congress now. They have no electoral fear of using things like that as leverage because we allow it, being us, the voters. I just wrote about this in Ordinary Times about, the fact that they can pass a quote unquote clean bill on 5 minutes notice, that gives the game up. They could pass this stuff anytime they want to because they did it. We just watched them do it. And they just did it again this weekend with the highway bill, funding the highway bill. They can pass this stuff clean. They don't want to pass it clean because they can pass all this stuff in big omnibuses, or they want to use circumstances as leverage to pack all this other stuff into these bills. And then they pressure everybody and jam it in. It's just a tactic. And one of these days, it's going to really burn them. It may be this one because now they've already pushed back and said it's going to take us another month to get this reconciliation bill done. One of these days, it's really going to burn them because they keep wanting to put everybody against the wall. And at some point, somebody's going to start pushing back and say no. But the debt ceiling, they will never, ever break the debt ceiling. It would be so catastrophic to the country. You start talking about Social Security checks stop coming home. You want to talk about people getting upset, and then the financial repercussions. It's never going to happen. They're always going to pass it. It's just a matter of trying to shift blame. And I don't even know why they're trying to shift blame because the American people, frankly, just don't care. We've got years of history showing that. It's theater. It's a mess. And it's our own fault because we tolerate it.
And at some point, though, are people going to then say in response, okay, enough of this. We know that this is a game. We know that you're doing this and I think one of the weird things that goes on here is that all of these little sound bites then get taken to the PACs, and the PACs are like, oh, look at, Senator X was against this because they said that, used in campaign ads and over. At what point are we going to say,
I don't know. Probably at some point it'll become a theater thing where they just don't even bother doing it anymore. I don't know how they would do that legally, but right now it's advantageous because they know, they have hard limits, like the debt ceiling will come up every so often, the fiscal year every year with the budget. They'll always come up with some emergency, and we've heard that over and over again now that we're always, legislating by emergency. They'll figure out some way to use the circumstance like a gun to the head of the country to try to push through what they want to do, and that's both parties because they're all going to do it. As long as it's a tool, they're going to use it. I don't know that we're going to be free of this anytime soon because, again, the American people we've just look at all the money we've spent the last 3 or 4 years, and I understand the COVID stuff. Some of that was just going to be baked into the cake, but the fiscal responsibility gets a lot of play online. It gets a lot of play in op-eds, but the voting electorate sure doesn't seem to care about it because they don't seem to punish anybody for doing anything other than spending a lot of money. So that's a separate issue, but they've got the same root problem of, I don't think we have much accountability in government in any way, shape, or form. And it's certainly not when it comes to giving money to us and we can just go off and collar and be fat, dumb, and happy. I don't see us raising up and stopping that anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I wonder if COVID exacerbated that, because then the blank checkbook, the blank checks they're written by everybody.
Well, it sure did for the states. Look how the governors all reacted to it, because that was just a flood of they had so much money. They still haven't spent some of that second COVID stimulus money because they don't even have anywhere to say. Remember the referral or the rental assistance program, they're talking about people getting kicked out. Only a fraction of that's even gotten out through the states because they can't get it out the door fast. And they pump so much money into the states. When that kind of stuff's happening, it's just bad government. It's not efficient. It's not good government, and it's just going to cause more and more problems. And worst of all, now you've got a situation where you get people addicted to it. Where like, well, I wonder what other kind of emergencies we can have to get the faucet turned back on again. And you don't want to get conspiratorial because it's not that, but it's just human nature. When these states that are strapped tight, when they start needing money next time you have an emergency, they're gonna make sure their emergency is just a little bit more emergency-ish than the next state over. And that's something we're probably gonna have to really pay attention to, because I don't think they're done legislating by emergency or governing by emergency anytime soon. Seems like it's happening more and more, if anything.
Let's shift gears a little bit, although this is related because you're a military vet, you spent a lot of time overseas, and I want to ask you about Afghanistan because that departure was, in the sober light of day, it's been what, mid-August, 6 weeks or so.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it appears that, well, I'll wax poetic for a second, then I'll get to my question. I mean, on the one hand, it seems like everybody's talking points, they're buckling down on the talking points. So on the Biden side, it was inevitable. It had to happen. The collapse was going to be chaotic.
Sure.
And let's move on. No more American troops. And I understand that they keep with the talking points because that's their job. They're the party in power, and they've got the bully pulpit, and they can do this sort of thing. On the flip side, you have continued stories coming out about how bad it was, how many people are really stuck over there, how the drone offing of the ISIS leader or whatever it was in fact killing of 10 innocent civilians. And you get some indignation on the right, which is warranted because it was a complete debacle. So all that being said, I'd love to get your thoughts as someone who is a military guy of how it happened and why it happened and what goes on from here.
Yeah, I mean, the part out is in, the Reader's Digest part out version. Yes, it was going to be messy no matter what, because there's no good way to lose a war. There's certainly no good way to turn an entire country over to a band of horrible, evil people like the Taliban is. There's no way to give them a whole country without it being a god-awful tragedy. So that part's true. Could you have mitigated what happened? I think so, especially now that we know what we know. The facts on the ground are we've had 4 administrations, 2 Democratic, 2 Republicans. They all have a share of blame on this. This has been something that probably for, let's say the first 2 or 3 years, we were really doing the Al-Qaeda mission mostly. And then from that, so we've got 15, 16 years of kicking the can down the road on Afghanistan. And you could really say the last 8 to 10, once President Obama really upped the troop levels and tried to do something there. So they've known, anybody that cared to knew that this was not going to be a constant thing, especially when the American people turned against it. Now, strategically, we can argue that, hey, we should have kept a small footprint and kept people there and kept stability. And I'm probably in that camp, but you would also have to have the public on board with that. Because the really hard question was, would you in perpetuity be okay losing, 20 to 50 U.S. troops every year, which is about what we're doing? And remember, you're one car bomb or one Chinook going down for double or tripling that number at any given time. Are you okay doing that? Is it worth doing that? And the American people had decided it's not, which means the political leaders eventually were going to catch up and say it's not. Biden probably started out okay, going, okay, I'm going to take the hit. I'm getting us out. We're done. And if he would have just stuck to that, I can respect that. It's the least, I don't agree with it, but I can respect the position. The problem we have now is, and yeah, I understand that he had the Trump deal to deal with, and that's a whole separate thing. But he knew when he came into office that was in place. The Biden administration knew, especially since March when they announced the change of the deadline to September, which was just for no reason other than the optics. They knew since March that they needed to get everybody out. they especially knew if you have nobody randos like me in June and July, and you can go look on my Twitter feed, we're like, hey, the Taliban's rolling through the country. You've only got a couple of weeks, if that. And it was lots of people because you could tell like they had half the country by the middle of June. It was very apparent that Cabal was not going to hold up much longer, and yet they seemed to not process it. By some miracle of God, and I don't have a good explanation for it, that was not any uglier than it was. And the Abbey Gate bombing was terrible with the losing of the Marines and the Army personnel that we lost at the Abbey Gate. But if you would have told us that first weekend when Cabal was coming down that was going to be the entire personal bill for that, we would have been shocked, because it sure looked like it was going to be a lot worse than that. The military really did an amazing job. Somehow the alliance we built with the Taliban, or the peace, or the whatever you want to call it, ceasefire, held up. So you can parse that out however you want to. So if you want to call it a successful failure, I guess you could say that, but I don't think that absolves anybody of blame that it was a failure that needed to be succeeded at the end, because the military did what they always do and bailed everybody out. There's a lot of questions, and I very much doubt we'll ever get good answers on a lot of them. The Senate hearing and the House hearings were, frankly, I couldn't even watch it because it's embarrassing. Not asking questions that are relevant whatsoever. I wrote about it as, congressional hearings are not the place to go for truth, because that's not what those are. They're press conferences and fundraising. I don't know that we'll ever know the real answers, but yes, the Biden administration has plenty of blame. The Trump administration has plenty of blame. The Bush administration, the Obama administration, this is a 20-year mess. It's such a big mess that I doubt we ever get a good answer on accountability whatsoever. So that's just the nutshell on what happened. It's amazing that we got out. Is it going to be a big mess that we're going to deal with down the road? Probably, but here we are. So onward.
What happens next?
With Afghanistan, it's going to be a human rights disaster. As always with Afghanistan, the key is Pakistan, not Afghanistan.
Why?
You have China, which is buddying up to the Taliban because they've put something like $60 billion into Pakistan, because that's that western end of their Belt and Road Initiative, and they've already had some terrorist attacks from affiliated groups hitting their Belt and Road stuff. So they're trying to make nice to cut down on their terrorist attacks. Now China's going to get involved there. Russia's panicking because now they're worried about refugees coming up through Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and unsettling their area. It's been the graveyard of empires. People say that, but they don't understand, because it's the crossroad of empires, and that's not going to change. It's still going to be a mess. It's still going to be a hot spot, and at some point it's going to draw us back in, because when you have Russia, you have China, you have the Taliban openly saying they want Kashmir, they want to get involved in Kashmir. Now that drags in India. Now you got India and Pakistan and hundreds of years of that mess, and they've both got nukes, and India is a great ally of ours, but they're, entwined with Russia for their arms deal. It's a big mess. None of that's going to change just from us pulling out, and we're still going to be involved in some way, shape, or form. And I fear at some point we're probably going to be involved going back again, probably not like, a full-blown 100,000 troop invasion thing. But the other thing is, when we pulled everybody else, we've lost all our networks with human intel, our resources, those sort of things. It's going to take a long time to rebuild those sorts of things. So we're going to be flying blind in Afghanistan for a while until we kind of get our foot again, and then we'll see what happens in the future. But that area of the world has always been a hot spot. It's always going to be a hot spot.
The outset of this question, you mentioned that Pakistan is more vital. What's the reasoning behind that?
Pakistan has always, their ties with the Taliban are long and deep and well known. They've harbored them. They have a weird, I'll mispronounce his name, but the guy's basically going to be running their government for him, that's been meeting with all the dignitaries. He was in prison in Pakistan, so that ought to be an interesting thing to pay attention to, whether he holds ill regard or if he just kind of figures that par for the course. But Pakistan's always the key to Afghanistan, because it's the stable neighbor, and then they've always tolerated the Taliban destabilizing Afghanistan for their own means. And Pakistan is a nuclear power. So it's somebody that we always need to keep a very tight eye on now. They seem pretty stable comparatively right now. But with China pumping money into Pakistan, with the Taliban now back active, Is the Taliban going to be able to hold Afghanistan? Remember, Afghanistan has double the population now that it had when they were last in power in 1999, 2000. The median age in Afghanistan is like 25. It's a very young country. The old tribal systems are pretty much gone that they used to draw power from. There's a lot of urbanization in Afghanistan because they were all there after our money. Let's call it what it is. And our money was in the cities. Taliban may have a hard time consolidating and holding power in that country. There's a lot of moving parts here.
If the population doubled in 20 years, where did everybody come from?
Some expatriated back. They had people that when we took over the country, they wanted to go back. That was a lot of the refugees we were trying to get out. The reason a lot of those Afghans had papers and citizenship and green cards was they were Americans and they wanted to go back, homestead for lack of a better term, those sorts of things. And then when you have stability in a country that didn't have stability all of a sudden, and we did, even though people consider it a war, there was stability comparatively. You're going to have things like, population growth, economic growth, especially with the amount of money we were pumping into the country. So, the Taliban's going to have we're going to have to see how that goes. They're going to get some pushback somewhere in here. They're going to have to consolidate power. And then, is Pakistan going to continue to help them, or are they going to kind of do the half-hearted helping them thing to just kind of keep their neighbor unstable, that sort of thing that they've traditionally done? There's a lot of moving parts there. So it's just something to watch. But, again, it was bad for us. It was embarrassing for us, but time marches on and it's not stopping for anybody. And Afghanistan's going to keep going and the world's going to keep turning, and we better keep an eye on it. And I know a lot of Americans just want to do this and think we're done with it, but that's not going to be the case. The rest of the world's going to draw us back in at some point.
Let's shift gears again. I want to talk
Sure.
about your writing work and specifically the website Ordinary Times.
Yeah.
And the work you're doing there as, I guess, writer sometimes and editor lots of times.
Yeah.
Give us the elevator pitch on that site and why you're working there and what sort of things we can find there.
They do culture and politics. They've actually been around a long time. The website's been up for about 12, 13 years now, but it actually goes back to the old list server, email list, discussion board days of the internet. Originally it was called Ordinary Gentlemen, the League of Ordinary Gentlemen, the comic, kind of a takeoff on that. And then, a little more inclusive when they went to a website. But if you go through the alumni list, people that have had a cup of coffee or hung out for a while, you'll recognize some names that have gone on to. So we've got a pretty good alumni list. We're very proud of it. We publish everything, a wide, diverse grouping, and we've got some really talented, everything from political analysis. We have a piece that's doing really well today on mayonnaise is evil. Believe it or not. So we do a little bit of everything, but we're very, very proud of it. It is one of the few places on the internet that really does have discussions worth hearing, and it's because it's got really good people. So the pitch is it's everything with culture and politics you can think of, but you probably want to be decently informed before you wade into our discussion board, because those guys usually know what they're talking about and they're pretty sharp men and women that are very, very talented. And we're very, very proud of it. I was very fortunate when I started writing. Will Truman, who's the editor-in-chief, invited me into, hey, do you want to write something sometime? That turned into me kind of doing everything. But it's been a blessing for me. It's been a wonderful outlet, and I've gotten way more out of it than I give to it. I promise you that. But we're very proud of it. People can check it out, ordinary-times.com. We have great content, and best part is it's free. Only costs you a click. It's we call it the best website you can't pay for, even if you wanted to.
There you go. Yeah, no paywalls for you guys.
No paywalls. It's all free, all volunteer, a bunch of amateurs, but we do pretty good with it. We'd put it up with anybody for a bunch of amateurs. We do okay.
I noticed you're wearing the Mountaineers shirt this weekend.
Yeah, I usually am.
Yeah, or today. And what happened this weekend? That's not a loaded question. I did not know what, so that wasn't designed to offend.
I've been watching football all my life, and if I tried to explain to you the decision-making process of the last 45 seconds of that game, I would fail. They, of course, week before this, we lost to Oklahoma in a game. Oklahoma didn't lead the entire time there was time on the clock, so that was heartbreaking. This one, they got down to Texas Tech. Texas Tech was winning, and then they got the ball back with about 20 seconds left, and they got about half of what they needed to get down the field, and then for some inexplicable reason didn't spike the ball, ran some half crazy play in a burst, and I can't explain it, but I love my Mountaineers, but we have two half quarterbacks right now, which never works well. They're platooning him. One guy can run, one guy can kind of throw sometimes, and the other one can't do the other, and that just never works out very well, especially when you're in the Big 12 trying to play some real powerhouse teams. So, yeah, some rough coaching. Probably because we don't have a quarterback. That usually doesn't end well when it's crunch time in a football game. Bad stuff happens, and sure enough, it did. But we beat Virginia Tech. I could lose the rest of the season. I'm okay. We got the Black Diamond Trophy back for the first time in years. So,
and my dog approves of that as well. Crystal ball for me though, because we had Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Opening up that, what is it, triennial? Would it be triennial? I don't know. It's happening again. There's going to be this shift. And to be honest with you, I was a little surprised that it didn't go further.
Sure.
Because I would have expected someone like the Big Ten to pounce.
Sure.
And the one thing, and I know enough to be dangerous about college sports, having been a former former sports information director at the Division I level, so that carries me very little credibility. But oh well.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, it's the one thing as I talk to people in the industry and people who are connected to the various schools, the one theme I keep hearing is why haven't or when will West Virginia join the ACC?
Yeah, it makes so much sense. Of course, they were in the Big East. One thing that happened, the Virginia Tech game, I was joking about it, but the reason we hadn't played in years. It was almost 6,000 days since and even on social media, on Twitter, we were talking a lot of smack with all the Virginia Tech people and all the West Virginia states. Like, man, that was so good. It was just fun. It was great to have that rivalry back. West Virginia and Pitt, which, they're only about an hour and a half drive apart, backyard brawl. All those old Big East stuff. Boston College used to be a great, because, West Virginia recruits heavily in that area. All those old schools, it just makes all kinds of sense. And that was one of the things after the Virginia Tech games, like, God, this was good. I miss this because it's just, I can't get excited about playing Texas Tech. No offense to Texas Tech, but it makes all the sense in the world, but you understand it's a money thing.
Right.
West Virginia did what they had to do, and they jumped in the Big 12 because it was jump in the Big 12 or get left behind. So I don't blame them for that a bit. That was an Oliver Luck move when he was there. I don't blame them for doing it, but now they're kind of stuck because when Texas and Oklahoma do this thing, what's going to happen? I don't know. I would love for them to get in the ACC. Even basketball wise, they would fit in. You got Huggins getting ready to either this year or next year is going to be, taking over that number 2 slot, all-time wins. It just makes so much sense. It'll probably never happen. That's kind of where West Virginia fans have wound up on it because they travel good. They're one of the best traveling teams in the country. That's why they get a bowl game, even when they've got a crappy schedule. They travel great. They bring in money. They do good on TV. It makes so much sense. It probably will never happen. The ACC is its own thing. And this from being in the business, the upper machinations of the ACC is the Big Ten's its own thing because they're, they still try to hold on to the academic stuff real hard on who they bring in and that sort of thing. The ACC is very much they have their own viewpoint on things. I don't know if we fit them perfectly, but on paper, yeah, it makes a ton of sense, and I'd certainly be fine with it.
Yeah, and that's weird too because when you look at other ACC members, I'm a Syracuse grad, so.
Oh yeah, another great rivalry we had for years.
And does it fit academically? Does it fit regionally? And that was a case where it had to happen or else.
Yeah.
And Pittsburgh has a good academic reputation, but it's what's puzzling to me, and I can only hazard a guess because I think the regime, the leader of the Big Ten is relatively new
Yeah.
and had spent time, if I recall correctly, he was an executive with the Minnesota Vikings. And one of the things I think that's at work here is, on the one hand, you had Jim Delaney, who was a god when it comes to
power broker,
money-driven. Not that that's a bad thing, a money-driven leader. I mean, without the creation of the Big Ten network, the money just would not be flowing into the schools the way it has been, and now everybody else had to kind of follow suit. But I think that with the leader being new and with the real sense of sour grapes directed toward Texas and Oklahoma, which pulled a bobber, say, Mayflower truck middle of the night thing when moving or when deciding to leave the conference. I think that he just doesn't want to ruffle feathers as much as perhaps Delaney would have, because Delaney he knew when it was time to go on the offense.
Yeah, he'd be preemptive.
Right. And I don't think Rutgers makes all that much sense as a Big Ten member, but Maryland is a great win for the conference. Nebraska probably makes a lot of sense as a member, because once the Big Eight disappeared, it was like, well, okay. Yeah. But I don't think that the new guy, name escapes me, but I don't think the new guy is as knows when it's time to go on the offense or to play defense. And this really, with Texas and Oklahoma, to me, it seemed like the time when the Big Ten's got to say to itself, if we don't become a 16-team conference or an 18-team conference pretty soon, we will cease to be as relevant as we are, because the SEC will own everything.
Yeah.
And I could see the SEC kind of saying, you know what, we could use a couple more schools, and then going after, perhaps poaching away from the ACC or the.
And it's bad for college football, because we've seen the last few years with, Alabama and Auburn dominating, the national ratings have gone down. So it gets a little too regional. So you need a strong Big Ten. You need a USC or an Oregon that's really good. You need that balance for the game, for the good of the game. You don't want to get it too regional. So you need a strong Big Ten, and I don't know what the answer to it is, and I don't think it's going to settle anytime soon, because at some point you're just going to wind up with the super conferences, and then the super conferences are going to be the playoff, and that's just where it's going to. And we're going to go through some mess before we get there. This is like the middle part of the funnel where we are right now. What you're saying, and where you talk about Delaney, remember when he did Nebraska, that shocked everybody.
Yeah.
Something preemptive like that, because what's going to happen is you don't want to be the conference at the bottom of the funnel and there's nobody left.
Right.
That's where the Big 12 is going to wind up, I'm afraid. That's why I would like to go to the ACC if we could, but we'll see what happens. But I agree with you. I think we're just in the messy portion of this, where the next people to jump are a little scared because they don't want to take off the NCAA and everybody else. But somebody's going to have to, because this is going to be untenable for the next year or two until it does the next great shakeout. I think the next great shakeout, though, is probably going to get us to those super conferences, and then it should probably settle down again, because they're going to have to do the TV contracts in 3 years, I think. They got
everybody's got different sort of TV contract things. But one interesting development was, I watched a bit of the Cincinnati Notre Dame game this weekend. I grew up right by Notre Dame, so I've got some vested interest in what's going on there. The pundits this morning are saying that if Cincinnati runs the table, having now had 2 or 2.5 marquee road wins, that it's, especially after what happened to them last year, where they were definitely the most deserving team that didn't get in, although you and your Coastal Carolina connection may argue.
Boy, that was a good Coastal team last year.
Yeah, but
they were really good.
But that's the thing, where if we get to the point where Cincinnati enters Selection Sunday as an unbeaten team with basically a 2-year resume, to be able to say,
well, they get to make a call.
Yeah, we have done everything that we can. So if it doesn't happen after that, do you then see another sort of shakeout?
Yeah, and the Cincinnati's going to have the problem a lot of those teams have is those still going to be 2 marquee wins at the end of October. Right. You know, if Notre Dame loses 2 more games, that's not a marquee win. And, you know, this is where you get into all this mess with it. This is why I think the super conferences are inevitable, because you cannot get into this thing where, you know, the independents aren't going to have a chance like this. And we saw it with UCF a few years ago. We saw it with Cincinnati last year. Coastal's not a bad example. That's a team that had NFL level players. That was a really good team, and they're local here. And
right.
But that was a great program and a good team. You know, they never had it. They probably didn't even have a look at it, honestly. Mm-hmm. It's just not, again, I hate to keep using the term. It's just not tenable, because there's too many schools, because now you've got school after school after school that's just going to be on the outside looking in. At some point, it's just going to have to be super conferences where it's like, look, you're in a conference, all the conferences, top 2 teams out of each conference, or whatever it turns out to be. I'm just picking a number. It's going to have to be that way, and you're going to have to play. And, you know, like right now, like, why in the world, you know, if you don't play all top level schools, FBS schools, why you should be disqualified from the playoffs right there. Then, you know, why do they still let schools do stuff like that? You know, things like that are what's going to, that's how they're going to end up sorting this sort of stuff out. And then you got to play everybody. The top schools will fight that, but that's the inevitability of it, I think.
Although if you were to force Alabama to not play its annual FCS opponent,
in
some off week between the Iron Bowl and something, I mean, they probably tell you to go pound, right?
Probably, but it's going to be a competitive thing when you get to the, you know, if you start having 16 team conferences, you know, the reason they don't want to do it now is that's the exact reason. They need that hole in the schedule to get their cupcake in. Once you get, you know, go talk to the Big 12, what happened, you know, now they've gotten hurt because now you don't get any easy days off. So it's part and parcel. That's why they fought it. But now that you got Texas and Oklahoma coming in, if the SEC expands further than that, they're probably not going to have the option. It's just going to be inertia is going to get them, because you just ain't going to have enough spots on the schedule. You can't play, you know, multi-directional state anymore.
Right.
So, which is good for the game. It's bad for Alabama. I'm sorry the small school is going to lose out on the paycheck and getting beat by 60-0, but, you know, it's part of the evolution of the game, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and when I spent time as a sports information director, I worked for Chicago State University, which is a small Division I school, and that was how they made their budget every year, was being scheduled by those. When we played at Cincinnati one year, and that was like a $30,000 paycheck at the time. We play at Missouri, and this is how you make your budget. Yeah, that is your budget, and I think that's sadly. So then you get into the argument, and you can tell I could talk about this sort of thing for a while, but I don't want to eat up all the time. But you get into the argument about kind of it's the North Dakota argument versus the App State argument of. Are you better off
staying down?
Staying down at one AA, or are you know, does it make sense to try to pull the App State, and, you know, can you eventually make it happen with the big boys?
A friend of mine just tweeted yesterday about this, and he brought up Connecticut and Massachusetts. And they're in a conference, but they're like 7th and 8th, and they're both 0-5 and 0-6 respectively, because they're having to play all these other. It's like, well, what's the point? would you not be better off down? I know UConn had some success for a while in the old Big East and whatever, but there's another example of what happens when you get left behind out of the conference shuffle. But are they really better off? Because what happens is, and you know this from working on the administrative side of these schools, and by the way, you talk about this all you want to, because I love talking sports after politics so much. It's great relief to me. You know what happens is it takes money to make money. So these smaller, these mid-level schools think, well, we'll jump up and we'll make the money. But what you end up actually doing is you end up chasing it. And you end up investing money that you're not going to make back. And then you're chasing it and chasing it and chasing it. Are they really making the money worth it to stay up? And in most of those cases, if you look at it over a long period of time, other than 1 or 2 or 3 big paychecks, or you get the one bowl year every 20 years or whatever, or the one Alabama every 6 years or whatever the case is, the answer is probably no. Right. Money wise. But then there's the prestige side of it, because now you can go to your alumni and you can go to your boosters and you go, hey, we're going to do this. And it's fun. It's I don't want to say toxic. That's probably a little too far, but it's intoxicating to those folks, because it is a business, and it is a prestige thing, and it is a bragging rights thing. And it's hard for them to do the North Dakota State thing, where it's like, we're the very best at what we do and we kill it every year, and our balance sheet's in good shape and our school's solid. If they tried to jump up, they'd have problems. And you're seeing that. So it takes a lot of self-discipline from an administration in a time and an age where a lot of school administrators don't have that. Right. Especially public facing ones, where they have to answer for things like that. Because everybody wants to grow. Nobody wants to say, it's like, hey, we're going to stay stagnant. That's a hard sales pitch. Right. Right. But it's good business sometimes. There's nothing wrong with being, that mid-level that just never goes up, because, if you don't have the big up, you don't have the big down. Right. It's a hard sell for people, though, especially athletic boosters, when you want to make a lot of money. But it's just that, North Dakota State's a great example. They get on TV 4 or 5 times every year on ESPN. They get guys drafted. They're not starving. They're doing all right. Yeah. Well, and it doesn't hurt to win, 5 titles in 10 years or whatever the heck it was. Yeah, whatever it is. They're great. Yeah. I guess final. Do that, or would you rather be like 2-14 and be, Kansas, which, baffles me why they can't have a better football program other than the Les Miles mess. But, do you really want to do that, where you're just, 1-12 and 1-11 every year? You're not really gaining anything that way either. Well, from here in suburban Chicago, where the late great Gale Sayers remains a legend and is the greatest player to come out of the University of Kansas, you do wonder why. But then you come back to one of the old adages, is to never become the head football coach at a basketball school, or the head basketball coach at a football school. And how very rarely that works out for somebody. And Kansas may have had its Gale Sayers moment 60 years ago or whatever it was, but my gosh, it's a basketball school, and will always be a basketball school, what with Naismith and all. But that works out for him pretty well, looks like. Yeah. I got a buddy that's a Kansas grad. He's always giving me, I just love being a West Virginia fan. We get to play Kansas in basketball and Oklahoma in football. It's a wonderful existence. But I always teasing him, there's nothing wrong with being Kansas basketball. You're doing okay. You're not missing out on any meals. Y'all gonna be okay being Kansas basketball. Right. There's worse things to be. Yeah, and I mean, they could end up being like the BYU of independent in football, and doing okay in basketball just based on their name only. Well, Andrew, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, and lots of stuff for us to look at. I'll put the links down in the comments for the viewers, and we'll check out Ordinary Times and other things. I appreciate it, my friend. It's been a pleasure, and we'll do this again sometime. Please do. Love talking to you, and always available to you, my friend. I appreciate the time. Thank you, sir. Thank you.